Imagine buying your dream home, only to be told by a group of strangers that you must tear down the very gate that protects your family, not because it's unsafe, not because it's illegal, but because it supposedly ruins the community feel. That's exactly what happened to me, but instead of removing my gate, I turned their demand into my greatest upgrade. When I first received the letter from the HOA, it felt like my entire day had been ruined. I came back home from work, tired but happy to see my place, the lawn trimmed perfectly, the flowers by the driveway blooming, and my gate standing tall like the guard of my home. That gate wasn't just a piece of metal, it was something I had put thought, money, and effort into. It gave me peace of mind knowing that my kids could play safely in the yard, and strangers couldn't just wander in. But as soon as I opened the envelope and read the message inside, my heart sank. The letter was official, cold, and direct. It stated, "Your gate is in violation of community guidelines. It restricts community access and must be removed immediately." At first, I thought maybe it was some kind of mistake. Surely they didn't mean my gate? After all, it wasn't blocking a public road, it wasn't ugly or falling apart, and it wasn't bothering anyone. It was simply the boundary to my property. The more I read the letter, the angrier I got. They made it sound as if my home didn't really belong to me, as if the HOA had more authority over my choices than I did. The phrase that stood out the most was community access. I sat there asking myself, access to what? Access to my yard? Access to my private space? Why should the so-called community have access to my personal property at all? I kept picturing the effort I had put into building that gate. I remembered the day it was installed, the sense of pride I felt seeing it swing open and close so smoothly. Neighbors had even complimented me, saying it added elegance to my house. And now suddenly, it was being labeled as a violation. The frustration grew inside me because I knew this wasn't just about a gate. This was about my right to feel secure in my own home. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the wording of that letter in my mind. The HOA was giving me a deadline, a time limit, as if I were a child who had broken some rule. I knew one thing for sure, if I gave in to this demand, it wouldn't stop there. Today it was my gate, tomorrow it could be my fence, my lawn decorations, or even the color of my house. This was the moment I realized that I couldn't just sit back and obey without questioning. The letter wasn't just paper, it was a challenge, and I wasn't ready to lose. After reading that letter, the first emotion that hit me was shock. I kept staring at the words, hoping I had misunderstood them. Maybe it was just a warning? Maybe they weren't really asking me to remove the gate, only to adjust something small? But no, the message was clear. They wanted it gone. The idea that someone, a group of people who didn't live in my house, could just tell me to get rid of something I had invested in felt completely unreal. For a few moments, I actually thought about complying, just to avoid trouble. But the more I thought about it, the more it didn't sit right with me. That gate represented more than metal bars and hinges. It was the line between my world and the outside. Every evening when I came home, closing that gate gave me a sense of relief, like I was shutting everything stressful out and stepping into my own safe zone. The thought of removing it made me feel exposed, as if strangers could just walk in any time. I imagined my kids playing in the yard with no barrier between them and the street, and my stomach twisted. No, this wasn't something I could give up so easily. The HOA's reasoning only made it worse. According to them, the gate wasn't in the spirit of the community. I couldn't wrap my head around that. Since when did safety and privacy mean I was against the community? Wasn't being a good neighbor about respect and responsibility, not about removing things just to look uniform? I felt like they were trying to control me, not protect the community. And deep down, I knew if I gave in now, they'd feel entitled to control every little decision I made about my home. That's when my refusal began to grow firm. I knew there would be consequences, fines, endless letters, maybe even meetings that would turn into arguments. But the thought of removing the gate was far worse than the thought of fighting. The HOA could demand, threaten, or guilt-trip me all they wanted, but I wasn't about to compromise my peace of mind just to satisfy their vague idea of community access. As I sat at my dining table with that letter still lying in front of me, I made a silent promise to myself. I wasn't going to let anyone bully me into giving up my right to protect my home. They wanted me to remove the gate, but what they didn't know yet was that my refusal was only the beginning of the fight. When I finally attended the HOA meeting to talk about the letter, I thought there might be some room for understanding. Maybe if I explained why the gate mattered so much, they would see my point of view. I walked into the room with a mix of nerves and determination, carrying photos of the gate to show it wasn't an eyesore, and prepared arguments about safety and privacy. I sat down at the long table, surrounded by board members who looked far too eager to enforce their rules. When my turn came, I explained patiently, the gate wasn't blocking anyone's path, it was on my property line, and it was designed to add beauty, not cause conflict. I emphasized how it gave my family security, how it helped keep stray animals out, and how it simply made my home feel complete. But before I could even finish, one of the board members interrupted me with a single sentence that made my blood boil: the gate disrupts the community feel. That phrase echoed in my mind. Community feel. What did that even mean? I asked them to clarify, was the gate unsafe? Was it blocking emergency access? Was it violating some technical code? Their answer was vague, nothing more than abstract words about uniformity and keeping an open, welcoming atmosphere. In other words, it wasn't about safety or rules. It was about appearances. They didn't want individuality. They didn't want my home to stand out. They wanted everything to look the same, even if it meant stripping away privacy and security. The more they talked, the clearer it became, this wasn't about community access at all. Nobody in the neighborhood actually needed to go through my yard. No one was being blocked. That access excuse was just a cover for their desire to enforce control. They didn't want a neighborhood full of unique homes with personal touches, they wanted a checklist of sameness, where no one dared to step outside the mold. Sitting there, listening to them, I realized their reasoning wasn't really reasoning at all, it was control disguised as community spirit. They wanted me to sacrifice my family's safety for their idea of aesthetics. And the more they spoke, the stronger my resolve became. If their only argument was that my gate somehow ruined the feel, then they had no argument at all. I walked out of that meeting not just determined to keep my gate, but ready to show them that their definition of community didn't define me. By the time I left that HOA meeting, the decision inside me was already made. I wasn't going to bow down, and I certainly wasn't going to remove the gate. But as I drove back home, another thought started forming in my mind. If I only left things as they were, the HOA might keep pestering me, sending more letters, piling on fines, maybe even dragging me into some long, drawn-out battle. They wanted me to break, but what if instead of breaking, I went even further? The more I thought about it, the more it excited me. Why stop at just refusing? Why not upgrade the gate into something so incredible that it would not only stand as my defense but also as a statement? That night, sitting in my living room, I began sketching out ideas. I looked up designs online, flipped through catalogs, and imagined the kind of gate that would make everyone stop and stare. Not just a basic structure, but a smart gate, something with technology, elegance, and presence. The HOA wanted me to tear down my boundary. Instead, I would build one they couldn't ignore, one that turned their argument upside down. It felt empowering to even plan it. Instead of feeling bullied or cornered, I felt in control again. I pictured security cameras mounted at the top, motion sensors that lit up at night, and an access system that would open only for the right people. It wasn't about isolating myself from the community, as they claimed. It was about making my home safe and stylish in a way that set a standard. Why should I let a group of board members decide what was right for my property when I was the one who lived there every day? I called a contractor the next morning and explained exactly what I wanted. At first, he chuckled and said, "Sounds like you want a fortress." I laughed too, but then I told him, not a fortress, a statement. He understood immediately. The plan was set in motion, and with every detail we finalized, I felt more alive. Where the HOA thought they had cornered me, I realized I had found my power. Refusing wasn't enough anymore. This was about taking control of the narrative. They wanted to see me surrender, but instead, I would rise higher. By deciding to upgrade my gate rather than remove it, I wasn't just protecting my home, I was declaring that no one had the right to dictate my sense of security and pride. The day the installation began felt almost like a victory march. The HOA wanted my gate gone, but instead, I was standing outside my house watching a crew tear down the old structure to replace it with something far more powerful. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, some whispering, some curious, as the workers unloaded sleek panels, wiring, and metal beams that shimmered in the sunlight. I stood there with my arms crossed, almost daring the HOA board members to drive by and witness what was happening. They wanted compliance, but what they got instead was transformation. Piece by piece, the vision in my head started coming alive. The new gate wasn't just taller, it was stronger, designed with clean, modern lines that gave it a futuristic look. The black powder-coated steel gave it a bold presence, while the minimalist design made it look stylish rather than overbearing. But it wasn't only about looks. The magic was in the technology. The workers ran wiring along the posts, setting up hidden sensors, cameras that rotated smoothly to cover every angle, and LED lighting strips that lit up at dusk, giving the entrance an almost cinematic glow. The access system was the part one was most proud of. Instead of a simple lock and key, I had card access installed, along with keypad entry and even a remote control option. If someone didn't belong there, the gate simply wouldn't budge. And the cameras? They were connected directly to my phone, giving me alerts and live feeds anytime someone approached. The HOA had argued that my old gate made the community feel less open. Well, this new gate made me feel more secure than I ever had before, and I wasn't about to apologize for it. By the time the crew finished, I could hardly believe my eyes. My home didn't just feel like a regular property anymore, it felt like a place of pride, almost like a modern estate. When the gate slid open with a quiet, smooth motion and then closed behind me, I couldn't help but smile. The sound wasn't just mechanical, it was symbolic. It was the sound of standing my ground, of refusing to be pushed into submission. That evening, as the lights along the gate softly illuminated the driveway, I noticed something unexpected. Neighbors walking by stopped to admire it. Some even called out compliments, saying how impressive and secure it looked. The very thing the HOA had tried to label as a problem had turned into something that others saw as an inspiration. The real twist came after the gate was fully installed. I expected backlash, maybe another angry letter from the HOA or even threats of fines. Instead, something entirely different began to happen. The very neighbors who might have quietly agreed with the HOA before were now stopping at my driveway to admire the new design. I heard words like beautiful, modern, and I wish mine looked like that. One neighbor even joked, looks like Fort Knox, but in the best way possible. It was clear that the gate wasn't dividing the community, it was setting a new standard. At first, the HOA stayed quiet, probably shocked that instead of removing the gate, I had built an upgraded version that was impossible to ignore. Weeks passed, and I kept waiting for the next confrontation, but all I received were approving nods from passers-by. Then, something remarkable happened. Other homeowners started asking about my contractor, wondering how much it would cost to get a similar setup. What had started as a so-called violation was now becoming a trend. The neighborhood began buzzing with conversations about upgrades, security features, and design ideas. The HOA eventually tried to address it, but their arguments fell flat. They couldn't point to any rule my new gate broke. It wasn't blocking public space, it wasn't unsafe, and it certainly wasn't unattractive. In fact, it looked so good that calling it a problem would have made them sound ridiculous. Their flimsy excuse about community feel crumbled in the face of growing admiration. Ironically, the same board members who once demanded I remove it had no choice but to silently accept it. Some of them even used the gate as an example of how homeowners could enhance property value. The hypocrisy was almost laughable. For me, though, the victory wasn't just about keeping a gate. It was about proving that standing firm against unnecessary control can change the entire narrative. What began as an attempt to bully me into compliance ended with me turning the tables, inspiring others, and showing that individuality can strengthen a community rather than weaken it. My upgraded gate stood tall not only as a barrier of protection but also as a symbol of resilience. Every time I drive through it now, hearing the smooth slide of metal and watching the lights glow as the cameras swivel into position, I'm reminded of one thing: sometimes refusing to back down doesn't just protect your own home, it creates a ripple effect that changes the whole neighborhood.